Hello there. We're excited about this episode, this interview. We have somebody joining us from Corvallis, Oregon, which is beautiful. And say hello to Becky. Hi, Becky.
Hey, Becky.
Hello.
Thanks for being
Hello.
here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And you can tell us how you want to tell your story in whatever
Okay.
order, just natural.
Yeah, I guess we can start just the sound of music. So let's start at the very beginning. It runs through my head. Um yeah, so I was adopted in baby scoop era. I was born in 1966, and it was a closed adoption in California. I was found out later, that my mother barely saw me, relinquished me about 10 days after I was born, but only saw me briefly after my birth. And then I was adopted at 6 weeks by a married couple who had one biological child, but had been having problems having their second biological
Okay.
child. And so I grew up always knowing that I had been adopted. I don't even remember being told, it was just kind of part of my story. And like a lot of adopted kids, it was you're super special, you're chosen. It took a really long time to get you, because I think they were on a waiting list for quite a long time. And they talked about kind of all the interviews they had to go through. It was through the county, Alameda County. And so they, had always built it up as this very special thing. And so that's how I felt about it. Until you go off to public school and you kind of hear other kids' perceptions, right? About, oh, so you're not real, or you're not
Yeah.
the real child, right?
Yeah, I got some of that and punched a
Mm-hmm.
kid. How much older was their biological child than you?
She is 3 years older than me. So we had some like overlap in school a little bit, but older sister, and we're still very, very close. She's
Oh,
one of
good.
my,
Okay. I
yeah.
was
Yeah.
wondering how that dynamic was.
Yeah, we were very close when we were younger, and maintained a lot of communication and closeness. And so we don't live very close to each other, but we see each other often. We talk and text all the time. So
That's good.
that's been a great relationship. Um,
Does she
yeah,
know you,
so
does she know
yeah.
you're doing the podcast?
I don't know if she knows it's actually today, but I had kind of talked to her about it, and she's
Yeah.
actually had a pretty major role in helping me. So I didn't think much about my adoption. There were the little kind of things in the back of your head when you're younger, kind of the offhand comments people you would hear, the family. I mean, I remember family gatherings where it would kind of be like, oh, that's Kelly, the biological one. And then and I don't even think they used that term back then. They'd say real or natural.
Real. I was just going to
For
say,
Right.
yeah.
real.
Right.
You're real
And then, oh,
person.
that's the
What
adopted.
did they tell you about your adoption? Were they open about, oh, your mother was this, she loved you so much she gave you away? Was that the narrative?
Yeah, they told me she had been young and wasn't able to raise me. And there was a whole story about when they went to the agency to pick me up. They went to have breakfast somewhere at a cafe, and a woman came in with a baby. And my mom said, "That's my baby. I know it's my baby." And my adopted dad was like, "So yeah, I was trying to calm her down." And he goes, "But then we went to pick you up, and that was you in that cafe," like the woman who, I guess I was in foster care for like 6 weeks. And so I don't know if this is true or not.
Right.
It's like this myth around my adoption. But all I really knew is that, yeah, it had been a young unwed mother. Um, that had been what I'd been told. Um, and then I went from college to graduate school and finished my PhD, and I was very busy in my 20s. And a couple years before I was with someone that I thought I was going to get married. And so I just started thinking about my future, as you do, when you get married and you think, well, I might have kids. I started kind of wondering about finding my mom. And
Mhm.
my adopted father had this piece of paper that he got from the lawyer's desk that he wasn't supposed to have, but he had grabbed it and copied it and then stuck it back in the paperwork, I guess. I probably shouldn't say this loud, but
I
he's,
think you should say it loud.
Yes.
and it had my birth name on it.
Oh,
And so
did you always know he had that? Sorry.
I did, I think he might have told me when I was a little older, maybe like when I was an adult. But I did, yeah, I think he had told me about it. And it was kind of perplexing. I didn't know what to do with it. It was 3 names that all sounded like first names. And so it was kind of almost seemed a little nonsensical. But then I found out later that one of those names was my actual biological mother's last name. And so through that, we started just triangulating, and my sister did most of this because I was in Arizona, she was in California, and this was pre-internet, right? Early 90s, and started looking at like marriage licenses and voter registrations, and anyone with a last name, with that last name that was the right like age. And so she came up with this like list. It was maybe like 20 people that fit that category. And we started kind of combing through it, and some of them just didn't make sense. And there was one name that really made a lot of sense, still lived in the same area where I had been born. And so I sent off a letter to her and heard back within, I don't know, like 5 or 6 days.
Oh,
And it was interesting because when I was preparing for this, I went back and read through all my stuff, because I found her a long time ago. And so I think I heard from her in 93, I think. And I just wanted to familiarize myself with those days. And that letter I wrote, was, I think, the typical adoptee letter where you are, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to disrupt your life. I'm not here to cause a problem. I'm not a problem. And I hadn't quite finished my PhD, but I felt it was really important that she know I'm a successful person. I'm a person, all this stuff that we
just read that in the book we're reading, like the proving we're constantly like, look how good I'm doing.
Our worth and we're worthy, right? And so, yeah, and she was like, you're not going to disrupt my life at all. I'm married now, and I have a daughter, your stepsister, and she doesn't know, but my husband knows, and he told her. She was, I think, 8 at the time.
You mean your half sister?
My half sister. Yeah.
Okay.
Did I say stepsister?
You did, yeah.
I was like, wait, how's that work?
How's that work? Yeah, no, sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, my half sister.
So she told her, like, she was waiting. You were not a big secret. She wanted.
I wasn't a big secret. She hadn't told my half sister, but she did right away. But her husband at the time knew. They'd been married for quite some time, and so he was aware. And so I think it was maybe the following. I think that was like the fall, and it was maybe the following spring for me. It was like spring break. I went to California. I had been living in Arizona and met her and her sister. That meeting is very almost like dreamlike for me. There's a lot of details I don't remember. I remember sitting on the couch and talking to her and meeting her mother, my maternal grandmother, and one of her sisters, and there were some other people there, and Lauren was there, but I don't remember as much as I wish. But her mother sounds like when I got the non-identifying information from the adoption agency, they kind of talked about how her mother, my birth mother's mother, had kind of been pretty strongly pushing the adoption, and my
Same
birth
with mine.
mother, had really been concerned about like the impact this was having on her parents, right? That her parents were upset. Her mother was particularly upset, and she wanted to do the adoption. She didn't want to upset her parents, and she felt it was the right thing for her. She wanted to go to college.
Okay,
Uh,
so she was, that was my next question. She was young.
She's very young. She was 16 when I was born.
Mm.
Oh, very young.
Yeah, yeah. Barely, yeah, 15 when I was conceived. And so, yeah, quite young. And then I guess after I was born, her mother had some second thoughts and thought about not going through with the adoption, but apparently my birth mother thought this was the best thing. And so her mother, my maternal grandmother, she lived about another 10 years after I made contact, and she always sent me a birthday card. And I could kind of feel almost like her feelings and her, it's almost like her emotions were even more intense than my birth mother's. You know, I think maybe just being older, and I don't know, it was really interesting, but I could tell that like there was maybe some regret or something there.
Yeah. Well, she's older at the time. She knew what it was to have a child and to give a child away, and she's having second thoughts. I'm sure that's her
Yeah,
family. You're her family.
right, right. But it was great to have met her and to have those letters, and I kept all her cards and letters,
Yeah.
which was
Well,
really nice.
I have a question. So, were you close to your adoptive parents when you were doing this search and all that? Did you allow your heart to open to your biological family?
Yeah, you know, I think I was concerned at the time about how it would impact, and they were supportive, um, and thought it was the right thing to do. And I didn't feel like they held me back. And I would say I wasn't like super close with my parents were, you know, I had a very normal, wonderful childhood. They were pretty conservative and religious, and I was kind of a wild child. And
Mm,
so there was a lot of tension in my teenage years.
hmm
And that kind of piped down when I settled down and went to grad school, and they were very proud of me. But a lot of different values and politics, and all of that. And I wouldn't say I was super close to them, but we were, you know, always in communication and talking. I wasn't estranged or anything. But I did worry about how they might feel. And so after that first meeting with my birth mother, my second meeting, actually, she came to my parents' home. I
Oh.
was with my husband, and she brought Lauren, and she met my parents. And my mom, my adopted mom, was very emotional and very weepy, and kind of kept thanking her for this gift, this child she had been given. And that was a very emotional meeting.
Surreal. That's surreal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Thank you for this gift.
Yes, I know. I
It's so
know.
odd. It's like, yeah.
And at the
Mhm.
time, you know, like I think I might have said a little bit in my bio, I was really kind of still in that dominant paradigm around
Yeah.
adoption at that time, and
Mhm.
very much trying to mitigate everyone's feelings and making sure everyone was okay.
I know. I did that for 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of what we do, and it
Weird.
really wasn't until maybe like 6 or 8 years ago, I was going through some therapy for some, just, you know, just to be a better human. And my therapist mentioned this, the Primal Wound book. And at the time I was kind of like, oh, that's a bunch of hoo-ha, you know, that's just a bunch of crap. Like, how could you be impacted as a baby by something like that? And I kind of blew it off.
Had
And
you had children yet?
I had, and my daughter was, you know, she's maybe, you know, yeah, so she would have been 8 or, you know, 6 or 8 at that time. But it was one of those things that it was my initial reaction, and then like I just kind of felt this thing in the back of my head starting to build a little bit. But I kind of put it away, you know, like I do a lot of things, you know. Let's put that in this compartment box over here,
It's a
right?
scary title too. I mean, because I was scared of it when Sarah said, let's read this. I was like, oh, I used to have that book. I got rid of it because it just looked scary for me to
Yeah,
open a page of it.
Yeah, and I'm a scientist, and I kind of like, my first reaction to most things is like, show me the data. Where's the data? Where are the studies? And so I kind of go there with my brain. But when I got this DNA match, so my biological mother had told me about my biological father, and so I had a whole narrative around him that they had been, as far as I could tell, even though they were quite young, they had had kind of an intense, sounded like just a very intense crush at that age. But they both like, it was a positive thing. Like she didn't look to that time and her interactions with him in a negative way. Like they were, in love as much as you can be in love when you're, 15, 16.
Yeah.
And that he had gone to Vietnam and had been in the war and had been kind of messed up from that, and had
Too.
yeah, and had struggles afterwards. And I had received this information from the adoption agency about how his mother was like a native Colombian woman. So I had this whole narrative around my heritage and my ancestry. But he passed away in 1999 before I was able to ever find him. He was very hard to find, I think, because he was kind of disconnected from his family. And so when I got this DNA match, years after his death in Ancestry, I was just like, what is this? Like, I don't understand this. It's like it says you share 50% of your DNA with this person, so it's either a child or a parent. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I didn't have a child unless, somebody stole my eggs. But I didn't know much about DNA, and I'm just like, oh, I just thought it was some weird thing. And I actually ignored it for quite a long time. I just left it. And
What year was this?
this was like 2016, 2018, I think.
And is this sort of in conjunction with the therapist telling you about the primal wound and
I
kind of
think
all the?
so. Yeah.
Kind
And
of
I think
coming to
all
a
of this
head.
was processing in the backfield, but I just maybe was not ready yet
Mm-hmm.
to pursue it. And I also didn't know enough about DNA to really understand, like, because you get all these second cousin matches, and
Yeah.
and then how they kind of redo like you look at those maps, and every like year or so they update it, and it's like, you kind of shift. And I just thought they're just figuring this stuff out, right? They just are figuring this stuff out. Or the other thing I thought when I started working on it, I thought somebody has done a posthumous DNA test on my father, right? They sent in a piece of hair or something.
Can they do that?
A grave digger.
I don't.
Yeah, a grave digger.
I don't think Ancestry takes pieces of hair, but they might.
They actually don't, but I didn't know this. And so I would be reaching out to these contacts, and I would mention his name because that's who I thought my father was. And so everyone was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
This is getting
It's
better
like,
and better.
yeah, the 40-watt light bulb did not go off. And so I had that question, like, how could I see this DNA if he died? And so I did, you can do a free 10-minute consultation with a genealogist at Ancestry. And they're like that he's, at the time of the DNA test, they had to be alive. Like, it's possible they could send in their DNA test and get hit by a car the next day, but like they were alive. We don't do any, skin or bone or, this isn't
CSI.
Yeah. It's not a detective show, right?
Oh my God.
So, and I felt kind of silly. And then I was like, okay. And they described how, well, you can use these public trees and second cousins, third cousins, and triangulate this stuff. Or we can do it for you for a consultation fee. And so I just decided to pay them to do it because I was like, I can do this. It'll probably take me forever and be like, who knows? And within like a day or two, they sent me his name. And then they also ran like kind of anything public about his, information, last known address, and sent that to me. And I did the same thing as I did with my biological mom. I sent a letter, and it was really weird because the town, his last known town was just a couple hours from me in Oregon, which was interesting since,
Yeah.
everything.
Did you tell her, by the way?
So I didn't tell her right away.
Okay.
And when I first found out about the DNA, I actually didn't tell her because I was just like, what an awkward conversation.
Right. Embarrass
Right.
her, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to know exactly what was going on first. And so once I did find him and have his name, then I emailed her and I told her, and I was like, no judgment. I don't, no judgment at all, but this person you told me was my father isn't my father. And that was a really weird email to write.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And of
How did
course
she
she was
take it?
like,
Yeah.
oh my God. Yeah. And so she kind of processed it, and she remembered some things, and so their encounter was like, it was like a brief hookup kind of situation, right? It was just a fleeting thing and didn't hold as much meaning for her, I think. So even if maybe that occurrence maybe made more sense, I think this other man like had more meaning for her, and maybe that's who she wanted my father to be. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I can't speak for her, of course, but she's kind of implied a little bit of that it made more sense because I was like, actually, he was kind of my boyfriend rather than this, this one thing.
High
And
school party hookup.
Yeah.
yeah, something
Totally.
like that, right? And so I don't fault, it's
No. And her
totally,
brain is so young. I mean,
and
these
like
are,
being that age and trying to put together
come
the
on.
timing and figure it out, and at that time, like considering that, it could be these two men. I mean, that was, a time where that wasn't very acceptable thing to be running around doing, right?
Right.
Right.
So I think that feeling and everything must have been, intense. But anyways, yeah. So, but like once she kind of was able to process it, they actually ended up talking over email, and kind of, I think, just tried to triangulate about, the encounter and each other. And I don't think they're in touch or anything, but so they kind of made some contact, and then they have slightly different stories about that encounter. And I feel like maybe the truth is somewhere
In the middle, as it always is.
Yeah.
But wait, so did you meet him?
So I did. We
So
emailed it
you sent the
first.
letter. Or
Yeah, I
you
sent the letter and he responded right away. He emailed me, and this letter, it was funny because I was looking at them just the other day. This letter was a little bit more like, this is who I am. This is DNA. It's not, there's no question. The ancestry people were like, we're 99% sure this is this person. And so I was more like, you are my biological
Yeah.
father.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything about disrupting his life. I just said, if you don't want to contact me, can you just let me know that you got this and that you're aware of my existence? And yeah, he emailed me later, and he had no idea, of course,
No.
because he
No.
he had no idea. And so we emailed a little bit, and then we my husband and my daughter and I, we all went out to where he lives, and went to his house and talked with him, and then went out to lunch. And he gave me some photos of his mother and his father and his sister who had passed away, and told me about their family. They had been a fairly prominent family in the Bay Area, an entrepreneur who, worked kind of in the tech, what we would call the tech industry in the 60s, right?
Right.
And actually I had a Wikipedia page about them and everything, which was kind of cool. And so, learning about all that, and then maybe,
Becky, how did you feel emotionally with him when you saw him? Like, were you did you feel any draw to him?
it was interesting because I didn't, it's kind of like, you know, when you find out you have this aunt or uncle that you've never met and you know you're related. It wasn't super intense for me. And I don't know, I've thought about that,
Mhm.
like why? I mean, I'm really glad I know him, and he's been very great at communicating and learning about him. I didn't see like like when I met my mother, I could see a lot of
Mhm.
genetic mirroring and all of that. But of course, that was 20 years ago when she was younger. Um, and so I didn't feel that's quite that same way with him.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's kind of weird. I do feel like I'm still pretty walled off a little bit about kind of how to process all of this. It's all
Mhm.
kind of pretty new and
Yeah.
very, I was kind of angry because I had this whole narrative about my life, right? About who my biological father was, him being in Vietnam and their kind of love. I mean, I have these letters he wrote my biological mom, right? About me. And that was like my story. And so
It's much more romantic, right? It's
it was
more,
much more
yeah.
romantic. Yeah. And so, and just that whole narrative and kind of this, I thought it was part Colombian, right? And I'm not,
Right?
it's like
That's
a
what I was
year.
gonna say. You got a whole culture back and taken away.
Right. And so then I'm like, I said to a friend of mine, I'm like, yeah, I'm just like this whole narrative, it just goes away. And she's like, well, it doesn't go away. That was your narrative for 20 years, right? That person was who you thought that is still part of your narrative.
Hmm.
And
I
it's
like that.
like, yeah, okay, I get that. And I'm sure that could happen to people who think they know their biological parents, right? And then find out
It
they're
does happen.
yeah,
Mhm.
right. More than we think. From what I
Yes.
understand, DNA is kind of really changing that landscape. They're finding out all these
Mhm.
things, right? People's
Upended many
secrets.
lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And that was like,
did he have
yeah.
other kids? Do you have siblings through him?
Yes. So I have another
Okay.
half sister. And I met his extended family. They do like this annual birthday get together for him, where they all get together and have this really fun dinner and rent like an Airbnb, this big house. And they invited me to that, my husband and I. Um,
That's cool.
yeah, so I got to meet my half sister, and I got to meet he has some other non-biological children through marriage that I also met. And so, yeah, I met her and her um, two daughters and their children. And so, yeah, and I've only met her that one time. We've tried to connect. We're kind of similar distance apart, but she's a lot busier. I mean, my biological father's retired, and so it's easier to meet him. And so we've had a couple of meetings that haven't worked with our schedules. So I'd like to spend a little more time with her.
Did she welcome you being a new sister in?
She did. Yeah. We haven't conversed as much as I would like. From what I understand, she was raised. I don't think my biological. She's only 2 years younger than me.
Hmm.
So and so my father was only a couple years older, and
Right. So he
so
was
he might,
young.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, so he was like 19 or something.
Mm.
Gosh. Yeah.
And I don't think he was, from what I understand, by his own admission, he wasn't a very good father. And she was raised by her biological mother's parents. And yeah, and I've kind of thought about like what it must feel like for her to have all of a sudden find out, right?
So wait, let me get this straight. Even her mother didn't raise her. She was raised by her grandparents.
Yeah, I believe she passed away when she was like maybe a young, like
Oh,
12 or 13. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, so she's kind of got
Adoptive stuff.
yeah. Her own
yeah.
stuff.
So
Hmm.
I think she's done a lot. I think her and my biological father are on in a really good place now, but like, I think she's got all of her own stuff going
Yeah.
on.
I'm
So I
asking
think
all this because I have sisters and half
okay.
sisters and
Yeah.
similar, and I don't know I don't know them, and they're around my age, and I don't know that, I don't know, I'm guessing that my biological father wasn't the best dad at that time. So it's just
Okay. Yeah.
I wondered if she welcomed you.
Yeah. I mean, she wasn't unwelcoming.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because one of my really close friends just found out she has a biological brother. Her and she's been kind of like hesitant about reaching out, and I keep trying to encourage her, and I'm like, it's harder for them to reach out to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just I would encourage you to reach out, because as the person who's kind of, it's like you've known your biological parents your whole life. They haven't. They're kind of feeling like the interloper into the family, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like they might be like, I don't know if I should or everything. So if I would go ahead and do it, because I think there's that tendency to kind of protect the privacy and everything, right? Kind of the old paradigm, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so I think it might just be um, just a relationship that might take some time to
Mm-hmm.
develop.
How long has it been since you met him? And
I met her less than a year ago.
oh, okay, very
Yeah,
new.
Very new.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
very new.
Yeah.
Yeah, very new. Um, and so I'm looking forward to just trying to kind of develop that and see what happens. I mean, it's so hard to explain to people, right? Like, do you understand that, like, I can count on my hand the number of people that I've met that are biologically related to me, and most of
Right.
that like
Yeah.
fairly recently, right? And the whole like
Gosh, yeah.
and understanding around like, kind of genetic mirroring and all of that. It's my adopted family, like, if you would have seen me, you would have never thought I was adopted, right? People would often comment that I look like my mother. But then I would kind of not see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at my birth certificate when I was little, and it had like the hospital and my weight and my, length and everything. And then it had like my parents' name, but they had told me
Right.
they weren't my biological parents. I just remember always thinking how messed up that was.
You
Mm-hmm.
knew that. Do you have your original? Because you're from California. You can't get them, right?
I can't get it. No.
Yeah. California. Come on.
Yeah.
Right. Get with
Yeah,
the
I mean, I
times.
think I know what's on there based on what my
Yeah.
biological mom has told me, but
It would be nice to have, right? I mean, it's
I
yours.
would like to have it. And I was just listening the other day to somebody you guys had on talking about California, and I just find it, one of our most progressive states is so not progressive around this issue.
No, nobody's progressive when it comes to this issue. They're
Yeah,
all on the same page. It crosses party lines.
yeah, I know,
Yeah.
that's so weird.
It is weird.
But when all the DNA stuff happened, and I kind of had this like this one narrative just fall apart, and learning about this I call him my new dad. I started getting really curious, and that's when I really started digging into like listening to podcasts, and I read Relinquished, which I think is
Yeah.
just a fabulous book.
I
Fabulous.
know.
Such a good book. And I listened to you guys going over it, and then I've actually looked at some of the academic work around adoption, and I'd like to build a community here. It's a small community, and I live in a pretty, a small town,
You can do it. We have one
yeah,
here in a small
yeah,
town. You'd be
right.
shocked. There's a lot of us floating around.
Right. And so I'm gonna try to do that. But I started, and that's when I kind of really, my whole perspective on adoption changed. I would say I'm pretty anti-adoption at this
Mm-hmm.
point. The circumstances under which I would think it would make sense are just such a narrow set
Same. I'm
of
with you.
Right.
circumstances.
Narrow.
And there's so many other things we could be doing. Like, there are situations when kids need different care,
Help, right.
help, and stuff around kinship adoption and all of these things.
Guardianship or
Guardianship.
Yeah,
temporary
guardianship
care.
yeah, and not hiding identity.
Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
It's just kind of insane. And so, but as I talk to people and people I know, it's everyone just has this win-win situation mindset,
Mhm.
right? And so just kind of trying to educate without getting,
Yeah.
Right. It's
about
you
the
have to
issue.
it's hard to find that fine line, right? Because when you do finally come to it and you're like, "What the
Wait, it's
hell? I am
crazy. Yeah.
pissed,"
Exactly.
and then you have to sort of find that place of not being pissed when you
Yeah.
express it,
Right.
but
And not
hard
being
not to.
kind of aggressive, which
And
Mhm.
you could feel the room silence. I did that at Christmas. All of a sudden the room's getting quieter and quieter because I'm getting intense. I'm like, okay.
yeah.
And
Right.
yeah, it's because you start saying, how do you not see this? Right?
Yeah.
That's in
Yeah. And there's still this idea that there's all these babies, right? There's all these
right.
babies
That's what the
that need
education
help.
is.
And even the stuff about, I'm less familiar with this, but I'm starting to, about the other adoptions from other countries
Mhm.
Right.
and what's happened and that
Many countries are shutting that down. Yeah.
and shutting that down and
Mhm.
everything, and that whole trend, like in the 90s and 2000s, especially with people in like my kind of friends, like adopting these children. And sometimes I struggle with that because now
Mhm.
they're like my friends, and
Right, of course.
And they've got a child that they got from China or Guatemala or Africa,
yeah,
or it's like, oof.
I
Yeah.
know. And it's like, how do I yeah, what do you say, what do you do? And I hope people like think about it and are reading
Well,
about
and
it.
that's a good opportunity for education.
I agree.
Talking about how that child will feel. Hey, I'm an adopted person who your child might benefit from this because they will at some point come to you with
Yes,
Mhm.
questions and feelings and here's
yeah,
books to read. That
yes,
could be your
yeah,
not like, hey, that was really unethical what you did.
Right.
right.
Might not be the road to take.
I don't think
Right.
so.
I did, and I think I put this in my bio too about how, I waited a long time to have a child because I was in graduate school and then I wanted to kind of get my academic career very well established. And so by the time I was ready to have kids, it was like, oh boy, wow, this might not happen. And people would say to me, well, you could always adopt. And I just remember having, and this was kind of before I was out of the fog, I just had this visceral,
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, same.
And it'd be like, well, why not? And I'd be like, I don't know, but that just makes me feel, I felt almost ill when people would suggest it. And so
It's
I
funny how
would,
they just throw it out too. People throw it out a lot.
oh
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, you can always
No,
just adopt.
you
I
can
just
always
heard
just
it
adopt.
somewhere.
There's tons
Yeah.
of like kids that need
Hmm.
homes and,
That's still the
Then
narrative.
if you tell someone, well, actually, for every baby born, there are 45 couples waiting for that baby.
yeah,
That doesn't seem to me like there's,
right. Yeah.
then you'll see the other thing that just sometimes astounds me is you'll see a GoFundMe for an adoptive couple
Oh,
wanting a baby.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The the mother might,
Modification.
it's
Yeah.
just,
Benefit from
Yeah.
that.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
there's all sorts of
Hmm.
Yes.
wrong stuff here.
It's very wrong. And but yeah, I was so lucky and just I knew I wanted that biological child. And I'm really lucky that it worked for me. But I would have been okay. We decided not to do anything like go down the massive treatments or anything. We were just gonna be fine with what it was. And so I was lucky that way. Yeah,
And how old is she now?
she is 16.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
And she looks,
yeah.
a lot of people are just like, oh, you're mini me.
And you're like, yay.
And I can
Yeah.
smile and say, yep, in this case it is.
Yeah. This is
I
great.
love
This has been a
that.
really great conversation and
Yeah,
really nice
yeah.
to meet you and
You too.
loved hearing
Thanks
your
for having
story.
me.
It was
Yeah.
a great
Yeah.
conversation. I want to hear if you do get closer to your sister and everything, update us. I'm
Okay,
curious
I'll
about
do
it.
that.
Just if there's developments.
Yes, I will do that. Yeah, it
Thanks
was
for
great to
sharing
talk
and
to
being
you.
honest about your feelings about adoption. I
Yes,
know it's like, it's
Yeah, yeah. I think there's, it's nerve-wracking a little bit that
it
anyone
is.
can like listen to this, but
Mhm.
I think
Believe
I'm
me, I
kind
know.
of
We
done
do
with,
know. It's
yeah.
like I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of people mad out there, but it's okay because
yeah,
this is education.
yeah,
Mhm.
right.
It's an important message to get out and for people to understand,
Yeah,
got to change the narrative however long it takes.
yeah, I agree. Totally.
All right. Well, so nice to meet you.
Nice
Nice
to
to meet
meet
you
you.
too.
Thank you, Becky.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.